Good evening, one. Good evening, all. Good evening, George. How are you, sir?
Kia ora. Very good.
Kia ora. Doing well?
With all the conversation about Te Reo and stuff recently, damn, I should have brought it up. Remember the eating media lunch bit where they like call up talkback shows and go, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. And they like, it's got a little counter down the bottom.
Oh, to see how long they do it for.
See how long they can do it for before they get interrupted.
It's funny when someone does something quite groundbreaking. Like Eating Media Lunch was very, very, very good television. And it's nothing against Jeremy Wells. I think he's a brilliant broadcaster. But, you know, from that, it's like something groundbreaking, amazing, you know, authentic, you know, clever. And then you move into higher roles, which are better paid and better profile, but they feel a little bit less. Like a really good example is Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert on the Colbert Report was just unbelievable. Was clever, was witty, actually made a difference. Goes to the Late Show and he's, you know, talking to various celebrities about what they had for lunch.
Yeah, well, his politics changed. He became the annoying centrist whose jokes revolved around Donald Trump full stop.
Yeah.
And that was about it. Whereas the Colbert Report was a lot more groundbreaking in its politics. But yeah, it would be interesting. I don't know, maybe you should get Jeremy Wells on the Department of Conversation.
Can't get it right.
Sorry, dude. At some stage, maybe he would open up about that. But I often think of that, especially, you know, if I watch the 6 p.m. news and I see the little like coming up and you see him there and it's like, oh, dude, what happened?
There used to be.
I'm sure he's comfortable in himself.
It's also the thing that, you know, quality doesn't always mean numbers. I think it's fairly evident that we're evidence of that.
Yeah.
But there was a guy. I'm embarrassed. I can't remember his name. James Coleman. James Coleman used to be on a radio station called Channel Z. You remember Channel Z? You're a Wellington boy. Channel Z was big in Wellington when it was out, but you're a bit young. Yep. So James Coleman, he used to do a show in the afternoon, the drive show from the Plush Lounge, and it would win awards every single year because it was just an unbelievably good radio show. But it wasn't particularly large, not because of anything he did, but because it was a fairly niche radio station. And then it closed down and he kind of floated around for a while. Now he's not in radio at all. But I always remember, he's always the example I go to when I think something can be impacting and brilliant and clever and the best of the best, but still not necessarily be the biggest of the biggest. You know, in fact, the biggest of the biggest is normally pitching to that everyman. And not to be too offensive, the everyman is kind of a moron product, you know, because it's got to be able to attract everyone to it. So not be too challenging, not be too clever, not be too highbrow, not be too lowbrow, and then it becomes sort of that kind of a blandness. So actually, the smaller things are often the most impressive things because they choose not to go down the bland path. And it's mentioning the Colbert Report. It's why Jon Stewart on The Daily Show was unbelievable. I mean, he only had 1 million viewers a night to that show, which sounds like a lot to us, but you know, out of 330 million people. But that was a program that made a cultural impact to the whole of America. It was utterly brilliant when he did it. I don't watch it so much now with Trevor Noah. I see highlights every now and again, but Jon Stewart was just unbelievable. He was quintessential. He changed networks. There's a really famous clip with Jon Stewart, actually with Tucker Carlson, and he went on a program called Crossroads that used to be on CNN. And he basically said, I think we might have even played parts of it on this show. He basically said to the two hosts, you guys are hurting America. And within a few weeks, that show was cancelled. And most people think it's probably because of Jon Stewart going on it and going, this is terrible television. You people are terrible for doing it on the live show. And Tucker Carlson was one of the hosts, which I always think is
I think we played that out actually on a very early episode of BHN.
Yeah.
Very, very, very quickly. I'll play
Okay.
the first little part of this.
Professionals.
Yes, where are we going?
First up, talkback host and mayor,
Michael
Michael
Laws.
Laws.
Hector, good morning to you.
Kia ora, Michael. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou.
Okay, see you later, stupid man. Hello, James. Good morning to you.
Laws allowed 6 tēnā koutos, but it's not that caller and his culture. He also has a bad aura.
I totally think that there's like this sort of thing. I imagine like if it was online, like I imagine there are maybe some Kiwis doing this sort of thing, but it's sort of very narrowcast. I mean, look at BHN where I think, and again we might talk about the RNZ TVNZ merger a bit more tonight, but I don't know. Maybe there's an opportunity for a culture defining nationwide sort of programming like this. Even if, as you say, it doesn't have many viewers.
Well, especially now, the viewers that watch or listen to something don't need to be necessarily as large, because with everyone seeing things on demand and passing around clips and social media, I mean, some of the stuff that I watch out of America will get tens, if not hundreds of thousands of views to their live shows, but then their 3-minute and 5-minute clips will get millions of views. So actually, with the way the media is ingested in this day and age, the live audience or the audience to a whole product doesn't even necessarily matter as much, because you might get 10 times that number watching a 15-minute clip from a something that actually happens. So I feel it going on tonight. Listen, if you're with us tonight, I would really, really encourage you to stick around, because we've got a conversation coming up later on tonight with Associate Professor officially, Tom Roa, and he is from the Maori and Indigenous faculty at Waikato University. If you're with us last night for the conversation we had in the second half of the hour, it was amazing. One of the questions we didn't get to, though, yesterday when we were talking about, racism and racist people putting comments on various Facebook pages, is the one thing we didn't get to was the idea of what is treaty-centric politics, Tiriti-Centric politics. The Maori Party are talking a bit about this at the moment, and they're talking about they want to work with other parties that have the treaty as more a centre of their policy making. And we wanted to get someone on last night to echo what that was. Respectfully to you, George, and to me as well, I'm not the person to give that opinion, because I don't really know what that means. And so luckily I managed to contact Tom today to come on to talk about the petition that went before Parliament today about the name change for New Zealand. But while he was there, we also talked about this. And in fact, of the 20-minute conversation, probably 16 minutes of it is about what it means to be treaty-centric. And it's just a learning curve. I actually do say to him at the end, I love sitting at the feet of people and just learning from them. I really did feel like that after having a chat with him this evening. You'll actually see when we talk to him, because in the background behind him, it's light when we start to talk, and it's getting dark by the time we finish talking. It was just in that transition of the evening. So that's coming up in the second part of the show. I really, really would encourage you to stick around. If you can't, and if you do have to shoot off, as I talk to you, it is uploading to YouTube, that clip. And once the show's over, I'll push save, and it'll be on YouTube as well. But which means if you need to head off early, it'll be there tomorrow when you get up. Before we keep going, we have Kim with us already, and Kim has made it very clear that she does not want RNZ to change. I actually hope that RNZ and TVNZ do something more. They don't become, what is the saying? The less of the sum of their parts, whatever that is, but they actually become better from the merger. Like a marriage, George. When two people come together and they become more than they were as individuals. And I mean, we're talking about that kind of niche programming or niche product that can reach fewer people but make a bigger impact. That was what TVNZ 7 could have been before it got canned. It was a genuine public channel, no advertising, and they didn't really worry about the commercial end. It was publicly funded, and they were just looking to provide a space for alternate voices. And I really hope that with the merger, some more access to a genuine public broadcaster when it comes to vision, TV, comes up. Because then we could be looking at some of those programmings and some of those things where maybe they're smaller perspectives, But sometimes it's like if you watch the Shark Tank, I watch that sometimes, or the Dragon's Den, they often talk about when you're starting a business, not to be too broad. You should go narrow and go deep, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's in the media that's why the NBR is probably the most successful place with subscribers, because they're narrow, they're all about business, but they go deep with that. They do a lot on it. So it's the only place to find all that information like nowhere else in the country. So they have a really good subscription model, narrow and deep. So anyway.
Yeah, and they become so culturally and historically defining, like eating media lunch. I mean, the thing that we're worried about, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but we might as well cover it now, is the expectation, if we look at the budget, is that this new entity is going to be able to return $306 million in surplus revenues through advertising and that sort of thing. So, and
over
there's
its
still
first 6 years. So that's
yes,
50
over
million
its
a year.
first 6 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's $1 million a week. Think about that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
$1 million a week.
That alongside reassurances that basically RNZ is going to stay the same and that sort of thing. But yeah, there's still some questions about what exactly this new entity is going to be all about.
Well, I mean, ultimately there will be, for example, job layoffs and that kind of stuff, because there's no point, for example, in Auckland having 2 newsrooms with 2 sets of people doing exactly the same thing. But I'm hoping what that means is, I don't know what numbers there were, but let's say there's 100 kind of production and journalist staffs, 50 at TVNZ and 50 at RNZ. It'll probably be more like 80 at TVNZ and 20 at RNZ. If they combine, so now they've got 120, maybe they can send 40 of them out into the regions and actually get better coverage out there while still keeping that core base in Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch or whatever. So maybe, as I say, if it gets bigger and can provide more, maybe it will be better for all of us. Hey, we should get going because we've got things to talk about and I don't want to keep people here till midnight. But before we do, I just wanted to bring one thing up, and this is a Dunedin story, but just I'm banging on with this because I'm without being a dick and being too concerned. I do have my my stuff in my hands on my desk, and there is a mask floating around, and I'm not trying to be a worrywart here or a purveyor of doom, but just wanted to give you a reminder as well that COVID is still out there and to take care when you can. And in my opinion, what we should be doing is getting on with life and have a mask on. That's where I'm leaving it. As you can see on the story on your screen right now, tonight, 6 p.m. this evening, Dunedin Hospital closed to visitors due to an increased COVID-19 risk. The Dunedin wards are full, and the Dunedin COVID ward is full at the moment as well. So I don't want people to shut up shop and freak out and not be a part of real life, but I also don't want us to go down the opposite path, which is thinking, as some people have said in the media, that COVID is in the rear vision mirror, because it's not. That's all I wanted to put out there. I just wanted to put out there the idea that, we do want to just keep a bit of an eye on this. All right. Hey, even though we're going to talk about the petition and stuff later on with Tom, I actually want to cover off a little bit with us first of all, because we don't really go into any great detail with Tom. We talk more about maybe the ethos of it and what's happening with it. But you probably heard that today there's a petition of 70,000 signatures being delivered to Parliament to change New Zealand to Aotearoa. And a very quick comment here from Rawari. If I wants to play for me.
We're really proud of the support that we've received for the petition. It goes to show there is a growing interest in moving Aotearoa into a more Tiriti-Centric space, but also to realign Aotearoa back into one Nui Aki. We're really proud of the efforts and the time people took out to sign that petition. So,
and I think quite a balance. I mean, we were talking about racism and how it sits a little bit more on the right at the moment. Like if you are someone who doesn't want to hear the Maori language, for example, you typically are a right-wing voter than anything else. And I'm saying typically because I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule, but I would think if you lined up 100 people in the country who were like, I don't want to hear that Maori language, I think you'd find 99 of them, if not 100 of them, would probably vote for one of the parties on the right, a conservative-based party. So in saying that, quite a balanced response from National leader Christopher Luxon. He said the proposed name change is a constitutional issue and constitutional issues should go to referendum. You don't just go and make these decisions unilaterally. Make your case, spend the capital, take it to New Zealand. People can then decide. However, he believes there won't be widespread public support for the change. I don't think there's much appetite for it at all. And whether you agree with National in general, I think he's probably right. I don't think there will be much of a drive from the general populace for there to be an official change. The other comment coming out was from Hobson's Pledge. What they've done, as the proper little lemon brown noses they are, is they've gone out and they've started a petition of their own against the use of Aotearoa, and is calling for Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to publicly affirm that the country's official name is New Zealand. So Hobson's Pledge, and if you don't know who they are the guys who talk about moving forward as one, except when they talk about that, what they're actually saying is we want to move forward as one, you all have to be like us. That's what they're moving forward as one. And this flows on a little bit from our conversation last night about, the kind of racist undertones or underbellies that we sometimes see in all countries, but in New Zealand, which is when you hear people say things, and I used to get this all night, every night when I worked on ZB, you have people say, I just don't know why those immigrants or why those, put your own minority group in here, don't just become a part of society and join in with us. My response to them was always, how many have you invited to your house to have dinner so they could join in? And the answer typically was none. Because there's two ways we can be one people. Well, I guess there's three ways, right? The first way is they can be like us. And that's what Hobson's Pledge is saying. We're one people, we're the dominant, be like us, and then we'll go together, right? That's one way. The second way we can be one people is we can find a compromise and we can give a little, we can take a little, we can move forward. Or the third way is we can be like them. Because if we were like them, whoever the them is in your example in your head, we can also move forward as one. But of course, groups like Hobson's Pledge and that would never want to be like them. They always want them to be like us. In other words, when the treaty was signed, for example, and Europeans and settlers were in the minority, and they put a whole lot of laws in place, for example, around Maori seats. And the reason Maori seats came into place was basically because Maori outnumbered Europeans, and Europeans didn't want Maori controlling Parliament. So at that time, it was beneficial for the Europeans to have Maori seats because it put this majority of people into a pigeonhole where they couldn't have control. Yet now that same group of people, European people, want to get rid of the Maori seats because, again, it doesn't suit their purpose now. So it suited their purpose back then, but it doesn't suit their purpose now. It is the literal definition of having your cake and eating it too. So the moving forward is one, or the why can't they just assimilate to society? What that means is you need to be like me, and it's never a way for a good society. George?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's not much to add there, right? It basically Hobson's Pledge has always been a call for assimilation, and that one has always been a European
of course.
one. No matter how they sort of spin it as some sort of unique New Zealand identity, where they don't even sort of acknowledge some sort of bicultural ideal. It's just a total assimilated one.
Yeah, and look, just let that rest with you. When you hear people talking about can we all just be alike, just say to them, cool, let's go be like them. Let's go down to the mosque and be one with them. Let's go to the marae. Let's go to the neighbour's house where they're celebrating Diwali and be one with them, how they're doing it. Because when it comes down to it, I mean, the definition of Indigenous people typically means the first that were here. So, you can say we're all migrants, but when you look at the definition as to how the world looks at it, Māori aren't migrants. I mean, they were technically, because we all know the stories of Waka, but they were here first. So that's what gives them Indigenous status. But, the neighbour you've got that you think is not assimilating to New Zealand, the only reason you're saying that is because your parents came here, or your grandparents came here, or your great-grandparents came here. Just because you were here first doesn't mean that you didn't have to be welcomed into society, or your grandparents didn't have to be welcomed into society or brought in. You just think about when you go to, I don't know, think when you're a kid, when you go to a dance or something, you can be a wallflower and be shy and sitting there being a bit freaked out, or you can be invited onto the dance floor. You can be encouraged onto the dance floor. You can have someone braver than you help you get out onto the dance floor. Be the brave person when it comes to things like migrants or minorities. Don't point and say, be like us. Go and be like them. And when, if you go and be like them, then they'll probably want to be like you. And that might be where you find that middle ground where everyone gives a bit and takes a bit, and we move together as one. Although I don't feel we need to move together as one. I think that's kind of a horseshit idea. I'm perfectly happy having all sorts of different ideas and cultures and stuff in this country, moving together, in their own direction, doing their own thing. I think the move together as one is a bit of a red herring, to be honest, because
for sure.
Why do we have to be one? What's the benefit of all being some kind of, block of smudgy sort of, I don't know, blurry one group of people all doing the same thing and thinking the same way? That sounds horrific to me. Just my opinion, though. All right. Shall we have a look at the latest news out of TVNZ? I think you've got some notes for that you can handle for us, eh?
Yes. Yeah, I do. So, I mean, we today in the spin-off was this article from Duncan Grieve, which is more of a sort of analysis, opinion article on the whole Santa Maria saga, as it puts it here. And basically his thesis here is that this is obviously a bad time for TVNZ, because of what we were talking about before, because
there's new news today from that story as well, isn't it? Which is the head of news is now on leave.
Yeah. Over here.
Yeah.
Paul,
so this was the breaking news sort of today is Paul Jurisic is on leave.
Yeah. He hasn't stepped down. He's on a period of leave. Basically, as the review process goes forward, they're gonna put him to the side. And the Duncan Grieve article basically sort of, I guess, backs up just so we wanted to highlight it because it sort of backs up some of the speculation that we've made over the past few days that there's a sort of internal crisis going on and tension between the news team and the higher ups at TVNZ. He talks about, and Duncan Greaves, he's an expert on New Zealand media. He sort of, he knows his stuff here. He talks about his sort of surprise that what he calls a well-controlled organisation that was outwardly content really leaked in the past, but now we're seeing leaks of leaks, right? We're seeing we're seeing the people inside this organisation leaking internal documents pertaining to this recruitment debacle, and he sort of points to this as a strong indication that things aren't working. And basically, in this article, comes to the conclusion that it's as he says here, it was impossible not to read it as an internal rebellion against the way it had been managed to this point. This is basically the news crew's response, the news team's response to the whole Kamal
that we highlighted today. It was that Sunday night, Monday night response. We talked about how my opinion was that was really, really, open, clear, honest journalism from a company that many accuse of being having strings attached because of public money.
Yeah. And as it says here, the scandal is now at the point where it is feeding on itself, with a senior TVNZ manager emailing staff complaining bitterly of being embarrassed and disgusted about the culture of leaking, which has sprung up. That was the email I'm talking about when I was saying even that was leaked, right?
It is funny that they're embarrassed about the leaking as opposed to being embarrassed about the hiring. Do you know what I mean? They may be embarrassed about that as well. It's a bit like in the US with that leaking of I know it's a more serious issue, but of the Roe versus Wade document. All the conservatives straight away got up and wanted to find out who the leaker was. All the progressives and all the lefties wanted to start talking about the issue that was in the leak. I think managers always have to be careful not to minimize the serious issue within the leak and be seen to be being concerned about the leak. If it's a there is rules and laws about people who leak information for the betterment of the population, and so it's always something. I'm not sure who that manager was, and I'm not saying they did that, but it's something to always be careful with, that you don't make more of a story about the leak than the information held within.
Yeah, I mean, people took issue with it was Andrew Fernie, the story production and operations general manager, who sent this. And I mean, I guess, and the reason that that's noted in the Duncan Grieve article is it's just another example of the divide among the TVNZ staff, that the news staff are obviously concerned with the hiring, and managerial staff seem concerned with the leaking, but also concerned with covering it up. The way all of this news started was that Santa Maria was leaving because of family issues.
Yep.
That what's his face Power, the head of Simon Power, who apologized today, apparently we know because of a leaked email, basically put that story forward, has said sorry to the people, to TVNZ staff, and said, oh, we're going to review it. Now, as Matt Nippert points out here, it's interesting that Simon Power, as soon as the story broke that it wasn't Santa Maria wasn't leaving because of personal family stuff, Power has been, very big on the hiring review. Interestingly, before, Simon Power only came in March this year. Simon Power, for those of you who don't know, is he was like Minister of Justice in national government, in the last national government, and then he was at Westpac, and now he is the CEO at TVNZ. And another interesting thing about the Duncan Grieve article is that people like Simon Power, people like Paul Ursich, have been seen as sort of outsiders among the news team at TVNZ.
Do you mean are you saying that your feeling is outsiders full stop, or outsiders in this particular story?
No, full stop. Right. That's the sort of culture that Grieve paints a picture of anyway.
Well, but that's not a bad thing, is it? Because that gives independence to the journalists and to the broadcasters on some level. If the management is seen as outsiders, I don't necessarily think that's bad. But what we haven't obviously talked about, which has been publicised wisely, so I'm sure most people know this, is the other thing about Paul Ursich there was he worked with Kamal at Al Jazeera. Yeah. So I like speculation here, honest held belief, whatever you want to do for safety, but it's also fascinating that he's been sort of, I don't want to say stood down, but he's on leave, whatever the correct term is, at the same time that talking about the hiring processes. And it seems that because of his relationship with Kamal, he may be, I don't mean snuck through inappropriately, I'm just saying that maybe the process was a bit easier, because if you got your mate, I mean, I applied for a job in radio once and got told that someone's friend also applied for it and they were going to get the job. These things happened in recruitment situations. If you know someone and you can vouch for them, I'm not saying he's done that in this instance, we don't know, then that can also make the transition a lot more opaque, because you're like, oh, such and such has vouched them, they've worked with them before, they're a good guy, and we already know their qualifications. All right, let's take him. You know what I mean? So that'll be interesting to see where that goes as well. I'll say this now. I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that Paul Ursich has done anything untoward in the slightest. I have no idea. But I'm just saying hiring practices, when you bring on board someone that you know and you're the boss and they're a high profile, media person, that can be sticky. And maybe that's the hiring process review they're going to have. It's like, if maybe it's the kind of thing that if it was in another setting, that person should be removed from the hiring process. This is a friend of mine. Imagine if it was your partner, if it was your husband or your wife, it would be appropriate to go, I'm not to be a part of this hiring process because I have a bias towards this person.
Yeah. I sort of buried the lead there on your usage, but the connection to the conversation we're having at the very start of the show about the merger is obvious here, and that's really where Duncan Grieve heads to with his spin-off article, is that this is a really bad time, right? Because it's destabilizing an organization that's unsure about its future, especially its news future, because it's sort of commonly understood that RNZ would be the predominantly sort of news, that their whatever part of them becomes part of the new entity, that they would have some sort of monopoly over news and the new organization.
Look, I'm really excited about the merger, I'll be honest with you, because I hope that we get a decent, and like the model is the BBC, that's the model. a decent public entity that's not like listening to mundane, boring, like we live in a world where commercial radio stations basically rule the roost, and a public entity, a public radio station needs to still compete with those people for the audience, not for the advertising dollar. I really hope that this merger can see the best of both worlds. You know, ad-free radio with all the best information, the best access to, you know, the politicians, to New Zealand news, but also be really good and entertaining. I don't mean like infotainment. I just mean, you know, good quality, entertaining broadcasting that draws you in. So it's not just like a BBC World Service. It is actually also something where you want to tune into to get more than just the facts. I'm not saying I want to hear spin or opinion necessarily, but there's a middle ground between like BBC World Service, just the facts, and then tabloid journalism. In the middle patch there, somewhere in the middle, is, in my opinion, the best kind of broadcasting. You know.
Yeah, that sort of long form feature, creative non-fiction, right? I guess that's the name for it, or
Yeah.
you know, documentary, or
Yeah.
you know, eating media lunch. That sort of commentary, societal commentary with comedic overtones, and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's exciting potential. Worried about the details, as I sort of alluded to before. Worried about the television sort of economy. You know, I mean, TV3 or whoever they are, Media Works are sort of terrified of basically advertising, television advertising is dying, you know, or they're terrified of the fact that there's going to be a government entity that has a monopoly over television, all these sorts of things. Yeah.
Crazy's mentioned some people, and I actually have to say there's one name on there, Crazy, which I think you might have there might be a full on. Kim Hill, no. John Campbell, no. Duncan Gala, hell no. But actually, Paddy Gower at the moment would be quite an interesting addition to TVNZ's breakfast show. I hadn't thought about him. Although
Crazy's saying new TVNZ boss, which none of those people should be.
No.
They should be on the front lines.
Yeah. No, I thought they meant should shortlist. You know, I agree, not the boss. But actually Paddy Gower on breakfast show would be interesting. Although I think Paddy Gower's got a really nice gig at the moment where he kind of works what he wants for Media Works, or it's Discovery now, sorry. And
I knew I had that wrong.
Makes what he wants. And doesn't have to get up every morning at 4:00, because that's a grind. It's a grind, man.
Well, that's what's happened with John Campbell as well, right? Is that he's going to get to do the special reports now. Yeah.
All right. Hey, if you're watching right now, Team Johnny or Team Amber, where are you?
Oh God.
Team Johnny or Team Amber in the chat. Be interested to know how we vibe about this whole thing. Let's have a quick talk about this. And there's actually one angle from this that was talked about on New Zealand media today that I really want to delve into, because I find it quite fascinating. Do we need? Do we need to snapshot the whole thing? I'll snapshot the start of it. I might cut out of this television thing a bit sooner. This report, but have a listen to, in case you've been under a rock today, or maybe you've just come out of a coma in the last 30 minutes. This was the Amber and Depp result today.
After 6 weeks of tears and tawdry details, it all came down to this.
The statement was false. Answer, yes. Question, the statement has a defamatory implication about Mr. Depp. Answer, yes.
Amber Heard found to have defamed actor and ex-husband Johnny Depp after she wrote about being the victim of domestic abuse.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven by clear and convincing evidence that Ms. Heard acted with actual malice? Answer, yes.
Depp didn't...
That'll do. We know the rest of it, the story from there. Amber Heard came out quite soon afterwards saying I nearly said this is a black eye for women. That would not necessarily be an appropriate analogy to use, but this is not good for women in abuse situations because of what happened. And actually on Today FM this afternoon in Lloyd Burr's show, they had a similar conversation, and I was quite interested by this angle. Depp versus Heard case will have terrible flow-on effects for domestic abuse survivors. My initial thought was, well, And I guess I'm just stating what the court case has found. I'm not stating what happened, because that's why you don't get found innocent in a court case. You get found not guilty, not proven. But in that instance, what they've found is Johnny Depp is not guilty of abusing Amber Heard. So therefore, talking about this and how this is going to impact people of domestic violence, my initial thought was, well, and this court case is not that, because the court case has found that Amber Heard is not a victim of domestic violence. Now I'll say it again, not to get me twisted. I'm not saying she's not a victim. I'm saying the court case hasn't found that. So there's a bit of an interesting sort of thing to work out here and figure out what it all means. But anyway, let's have a listen to, this is the conversation between CEO Dr. Ang Jury from New Zealand's Women's Refuge about how this decision will impact victims of domestic abuse.
I suspect it will have a slightly chilling effect for them. We're very fortunate here in New Zealand that we don't have the same sort of libel culture as they seem to have in the States. So there's not quite so much risk of that sort of court action here. But, you know, when someone sticks their head up over the parapet and says, look, this happened to me, if they thought that they were going to be put through the ringer in this sort of a way, you know, you'd think twice, particularly if the person that you were saying it about had said that this is what they were going to do. I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know what the ins and outs of this are. But you summed it up quite nicely yourself in the introduction when you said that the court in the UK found, I think, 12 of 14 instances had happened.
So I'm aware that this is a bit of a fine line to talk about, because I agree with what the CEO has said if it happened. But the court ruled it didn't happen. So when the CEO here says, you know, you're taken through the ringer if you put your head above the parapet, I would think if you're making a false accusation, then you possibly should be put through the ringer. If you're making an honest accusation, then you shouldn't be. That's the balancing line about this, because nobody actually knows. But it feels like they're saying, you know, it feels like the CEO here is saying Amber Heard is still the victim here. That's what it feels like, and that's not what the courts have ruled. However, the point was made about the case in the UK, and the case in the UK went not to Amber Heard, because Johnny Depp was suing a newspaper for libel for calling him a wife beater. And the reason, according to legal experts, may simply boil down to the fact that Depp's action in the UK, which he lost, happened to be decided by a judge, whereas his case in the United States was decided by a jury, and that might have been the difference. Mark Stevens, an international media lawyer familiar with both cases, said Depp's legal team in the US ran a strategy known as DAVO, an acronym for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender, in which Depp became the victim and Heard the abuser. We find that DAVO works very well with juries, but almost never works with judges who are trained to look at the evidence. Although Heard was not named in the British case, she testified over several days as a witness called by The Sun. The British judge ultimately ruled the allegations against Depp were substantially true, writing in a 2020 ruling that the great majority of alleged assault have been proved to a civil standard. The other thing about this, which was interesting in the UK, that is in the UK, the UK tabloid called him a wife beater. Under British law, the publication had to prove that Depp was a wife beater. But in the US, they had to persuade the jury that he was not a wife beater. So it was like two sides of the same coin, but I wonder if that makes a difference to a jury situation or a jury case as well. The conversation with Lloyd Burr went on, and they talked about the decision that has just come. Will it stop women from speaking out who have been abused?
One of the things that women say to us, you know, most of the time, is that they didn't talk about what had happened to them because they did not think they would be believed. You know, they didn't think people would believe them, and there we go. This is what we've seen.
Yeah, the court proved that, well, came to that conclusion, should I say?
Yeah, it did. In comparison to the British result, you know, so I guess it pays to shop round for a jurisdiction that's got a system that works for you. But yeah, it may well have people thinking twice. You know, no one will believe me. Well, maybe they won't believe me, and then what'll happen? You know, it's an ugly situation to be in, but I would imagine that some women will be weighing up their options at this point in time.
Final part I wanted to play from the conversation is the interviewer and the guest went on to talk about instances of domestic violence against men. Now, I was quite surprised, although the CEO here is from Women's Refuge, so they state quite clearly they don't work with men, but I was quite surprised at, I don't want to sound like a men's rights activist, because I'm not that at all, but I was still quite surprised at the tone that the CEO took, which was quite dismissive, in my opinion, of men who are suffering domestic violence. And I just thought, and this is what I do sometimes, I went, flip it. Just flip it and imagine that the same comments were being made about women who are in domestic violence. I know it's not the same, and I know there's not an equal parallel, but it surprised me what felt to me the dismissive nature of men in a situation where there's domestic violence.
Oh, I am told there are. They don't come to our service.
Okay.
We don't deal with men. However, if there were the numbers that some people seem to think there are, why don't we see them reflected in injury statistics? Why don't we see them reflected in homicide statistics, partner homicides?
Now, am I wrong? That just sounds a bit like victim blaming. I'm not trying to stand up saying that it's the same when men and women get abused, but it just sounds like someone saying, show it to me then, prove it to me.
I'm going to take a guess and imagine that a lot of the time, in Dr. Angjury's line of work, she's dismissed from people saying, but what about men, male victims? I imagine that's something that comes up a lot. The other thing I wanted to just point out is Crazy's comment. She sounds very hesitant. Is that because her team lost? I think that's probably not a good way of looking at it. I think, to be honest, and I really don't want to speak for Dr. Angjury here, but I have a feeling that, she pretty much admits that she hasn't been across this thing. And if you're the CEO of an organization like that, an advocacy and support organization, you want to be in the media as much as possible.
So you probably should be across this as well.
Well, I don't know.
This is this is the biggest domestic violence case the world has ever seen. If you're working in a domestic violence field and you want to be in the media, like you say, I'm not saying that she's got to be a fan of it.
No, but I think a fan of it. No, I don't think she has to be across this. No, I don't. I think, and okay, say she isn't, and maybe we should have her on and actually talk to her. But that's another story completely. Maybe she's. I'm just responding to Crazy's comment. Maybe she's hesitant because she doesn't want to talk about, nail down the Depp Heard trial as something that's going to stop people, as having some sort of effect. I mean, this is a sort of common, a common thing in. A common mistake that I think people make, and in media studies we call this the direct media model or the hypodermic needle model, where we seem to have this idea that media is this sort of hypodermic needle that gets injected into people and makes them think a certain way. It's not that. I don't think it's that simple, and maybe this is where I'd actually maybe disagree with Dr. Angjury, that I think people are smart enough to realize that this is almost this case, and you're going to disagree with me, Pat, is almost on another plane of existence.
Oh, no, I don't disagree with that. They're both nuts. I mean, so many of the comments come and go, I hate them both. They're both nuts. And I agree with it.
What I mean by that is it's almost in a different reality. It's entertainment celebrity reality. It's
no, I think there's an element of that as well. I think there absolutely is. Look, and the other thing is, the reason I'm sounding hesitant, to be fair as well, is because I don't want to make it seem like, I mean, no one has a clue really what happened except for the people who are involved. They're the only people that know. So I'm not one of the people who are going, Amber Heard, she's a liar. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just trying to work on basically what the court has ruled in this instance. If we were having this conversation after the case in the UK, we'd probably be saying, well, the court has ruled that he's a wife beater. Johnny, if you're watching, don't sue us. I'm just saying that's what the court's ruled, not what we think. The other thing, though, just to finish this off before we go into our interview, is that I didn't know the stats and stuff around domestic violence towards men. Not that needs to be a focus of this, but I had a look at a couple, and obviously when it comes to violent acts and serious injury, women are far more worse off than men. Dozens and dozens of times more worse off than men. But actually, what is considered domestic violence, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. There's another report here that says more than 40% of domestic violence victims are male. So I was surprised by that because I didn't think it would be anywhere near that sort of number. I guess what Dr. Angeri is saying is if it is, which again, I can't dismiss it, but I'm just saying, I don't know. So look, but that is
often a tactic of sort of distracting from the story, though. I guess would be my problem.
Well, no, and I think that one of the defenses. I just felt like in that last comment, it was like, well, if it's happening, we don't see it in the stats. But imagine saying that about. Imagine saying that about. Imagine saying that about like college campus rapes. Well, if it's happening, we're not seeing it in the stats. You would be dragged over the hot coals for saying something like that, in a different scenario. So it just felt a bit sort of like that's a bit of a strange way to word it and feels a bit dismissive. That was kind of my point just about that comment. But overall, I think I agree with some people who are saying they're as nuts as each other. They both were found guilty of libel against one another, but it seems that she libeled him a little bit more, so he got more money. That's kind of the end of that conversation, I think.
Yeah, I have to say, this is one of the nights where I'm totally on a different page to some of the comments we're seeing.
Yeah.
So
do you want to give us a minute or so why? Because we've got to get into this conversation.
No, I don't want to single people. I don't want to single people out.
You should definitely single people out. I mean, just bring them up and abuse them, and ask them to put their cell phone numbers and their addresses in there as well, and we'll broadcast those. All right, hey, we're going to go into our feature interview tonight, which is with the associate professor from Waikato University, from Maori and Indigenous faculty, and we're talking a bit about. And it's come up in tonight's conversation talking around the Maori Party. What does it mean to be Tiriti-Centric? What does that actually mean? And you guys who know me and have been watching us know that I always go to these experts and say, I'm a moron. Explain it to me like I'm a moron. I really need to understand. The reason we actively take that path is so many people see the headlines or they hear the China in the Pacific, or they hear the Treaty-Centric, but they don't ever hear the explanation for that. So I always try my best to start with the explanation, because then that helps us set up the rest of the conversation, and then we know where the conversation started from. I'm assuming, George, you're going to shoot off now because I'm going to play this.
Yep.
All right. George is going to say goodbye. So again, let's just say it's just me and Nala now. Nala's just broken her neck somehow on that bedding there. Came down and decided to join us.
She's fucked up, bro.
Yeah. So me and Nala will handle this from here on in. George will catch you tomorrow night. We'll see what happens for tomorrow night show. We'll catch you then. And for the rest of us, here is the conversation I had a couple of hours ago with Associate Professor Tom Roa from the University of Waikato on what it means to be a treaty-centric entity, because it could be you as a person, it could be in a relationship you've got, it could be from party to party when it comes to politics. And also we talk a bit about changing the name from New Zealand to Aotearoa, or making some kind of hybrid version of that. Enjoy the conversation. I'll be back here at the end of it. If you've got anything to say during the interview, put it in the comments and I'll bring it up at the very end before we wrap up for the day. From the University of Waikato, Associate Professor Professor Tom Roa from the Faculty of Maori and Indigenous Studies joins us. Good evening, sir. Thank you for giving us some time.
Oh, thank you for the call.
Oh, no, look, I appreciate it. For people who don't know how this all works, it was all very kind of, not quite last minute, but I sent you an email and within maybe an hour we're chatting. So that's it's fabulous. I really genuinely appreciate you stopping your day for us to have a chat about this issue. This news, we call it this news. Well, there's kind of a news and there's a story that we want clarification on. So let's start with the flow on from yesterday's conversation. We were having a conversation yesterday based around Leader of the Opposition, Christopher Luxon's conversations with the media yesterday. One of the parts we didn't cover off yesterday, which I'd love to cover off with you because we didn't have the expertise or the perspective to be able to do it justice, so we didn't do it. Yesterday, Mr. Luxon was asked on TVNZ's breakfast show about working with the Maori Party when it came to post-election negotiations. And the question was asked, the Maori Party have made it very clear that they will only work with other parties who are treaty-centric, Tiriti-Centric parties. And the question I wanted to ask yesterday, which as I said, I want to get the right people to answer these questions because I'm not the right person, is to go, what does that even mean? And we like to do this thing, Tom, on this show where I go, talk to me like I'm 9 years old. I'd really like to understand and be educated as to what it means to be a Tiriti-centric party, because then that will let those of us who don't really understand the complexities of it know post-election, can National even work with the Maori Party? Can the Maori Party work with National if they're associated with ACT, etc., etc., etc.? So why don't we jump off the boat there and have a look at what that all means first?
Well, I think there's about 3 or 4 questions in in that question, Pat. But firstly, the 9-year-old. Some of my 12-year-old granddaughter, I think, is smarter than a whole lot of 20-year-olds.
Yeah, true.
She's 12 going on 13, and I think that some 30-year-olds could learn a lesson from that age group.
Yeah, fair.
Their minds are open, and I think that's the key to this, is how open is somebody that you want to share an idea with, how open is their mind to that idea? So if I start from that premise,
yep,
and go to the actually the last question that I heard, and that is, can the National Party work with the Maori Party, and vice versa?
Yeah.
Well, you know, one day is a long time in politics,
It is.
and there will be all sorts of deals made after the next election. That there's nothing surer in this world than that there will be deals made of a political nature, of course, and there will always be this promise that is for the best of the country. Or is that a premise? So to come to the treaty-centric thought, what is Te Tiriti? And the present government came out with what they call the principles of the treaty, based on partnership, participation, and protection. Not in that order, of course.
Yep.
But the courts in the land and the Waitangi Tribunal, they do not adhere to these principles from the Crown, because they say that they're not actually part of Te Tiriti. They are somebody's interpretation today of what they believe is important in Te Tiriti. So the Waitangi Tribunal Health Panel came up with 5 principles, and I've turned their 5 principles into a little bit of a ditty in Maori, which are called te pau. Now, a pau is a ditty, is a song, and it often is political, and it can be many different things, but it's sometimes composed on the spot. And always the pau carries a message. So if I can share that message with you and the viewers
Please. Yeah.
at this time, Pat. Te pau is T-E-P-A-O. T-E-P-A-O. And the health panel in 2019 of the Waitangi Tribunal asserted that these should be the treaty principles, not with a capital P for principles, but just the underlying, if we might borrow that, Tiriti-Centric guidelines in how we work with Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Now, so the T of TEPAO is tino rangatiratanga.
Mm-hmm.
So tino rangatiratanga is often translated and described as sovereignty. However, this concept doesn't seem to appear before 1835.
Right.
This concept of tino rangatiratanga in the Declaration of Independence, and then it features very strongly and very assertively in the Tiriti o Waitangi, the Maori version. It's translated as sovereignty, but we have to really also examine what sovereignty means.
Mm.
And the base of sovereignty actually is that everything belongs to the sovereign. It's sovereignty.
Yeah.
Well, that's possibly not our interpretation of sovereignty today. Sovereignty means self-rule, independence, autonomy. So that's what's asserted in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that Maori retain their autonomy. Maori retain their self-governance. However, they give the Crown the permission to govern because British citizens were coming to Aotearoa and causing all sorts of havoc. They needed to be controlled. And if Maori controlled them, they would be treated much more harshly than if they were treated by their own.
Yeah.
So that was part of wasn't the only thing, but it was part of this tino rangatiratanga in Te Tiriti, that Pākehā have their own ways. Maori have their own ways. It doesn't mean that we have to change for each other, but surely we must respond and respect and acknowledge our own ways. So this tino rangatiratanga isn't very strong in policy making, nor is it very strong in law making. It is becoming more important as we progress through our understandings of Te Tiriti.
Right.
Number one is Te tino rangatiratanga, which respects that Maori retain their autonomy, their independence. That doesn't mean that we disobey the laws. It doesn't mean that we go about doing things as we want to do them, but we have a recognition that we have this right to be autonomous. So that's the very first principle, and that's the T of Te Pau. E is for equity. Equity is not equality. Equity is about a sharing of resources, which it was clear that the Maori chiefs of 1840 were keen to share their resources with this new group. I suggest possibly because they saw a wider market, and that the Pākehā was travelling the world. So to get to be part of that worldwide market, let's share our resources here and be able also, with working with Pākehā, share the resources and the produce of Aotearoa, New Zealand, moving out into the world. So this idea of equality is part of that, but equity, at the very base of equity, is a fairness.
Yeah.
So that in the principle of equity, the person or the group who has the least needs the most.
Yeah,
And the people,
Tom, I was going to say, I'm sure you've seen this, but I love this imagery of the difference between equality and equity.
yes,
It's great, isn't
yes,
it?
yes, it's perfect.
Yeah,
You know? So equality, you all got the same chance,
yeah.
but equity, you make sure that everybody has the right opportunity and that is realized.
Yeah.
So that's the principle of equity. The P of Te Pau is partnership. Now, this partnership is not about a senior partner and a junior partner, which is probably the norm today. Partnership is where, again, equitably, we work together, and when some policy is set, it's not that the senior partner sets the policy and the junior partner has to fall into place. It's about co-creating, co-designing, co-owning those partnerships, those policies. So that's the P. The A is for active protection. Active protection. Often protection is almost a paternalistic. I'm looking after you, babe. You got to fall into line with how I want to look after you.
Right.
And when you have an unequal partnership, and when you don't recognize equity, and also that there is no tino rangatiratanga, that the other partner has their own autonomy, then this active protection is not really a protection.
Yeah.
There has to be an active way of making sure that the rights of the partner are not just recognized, but they're realized. So that's the A of Te Pau. O is for options. Now, in terms of options, in 1840, Te Tiriti guaranteed Maori the right of opting into this new governance system or opting out. And we have to remember that in 1840, Maori outnumbered and were the majority. They were going about their normal lives, many of them with no Pākehā in sight.
Mm-hmm.
Today we have the opposite. Right? But the Te Tiriti guaranteed that Maori could opt in or opt out.
At any time as well?
At any time.
Right.
Now we have to be very clear within that, because of the first article, the Crown was given the right to govern, and so governing means making laws. Now we don't have a right to opt out of following the law.
Right.
Right? We have an option to opt into buying at Countdown or going to the local Foursquare, if we have the resources.
Yep.
Now, again, we come back to the equity. Too many Māori need more than others. And so for those who need more, they have no option. They just have to fall into place with what is given to them under the guise of active protection.
Mm.
So I think if I said this to my 12-year-old mokopuna, she could follow that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think about things like, I'm pretty sure National has talked about getting rid of the Māori Health Authority. And when you talk about, some within Māori need more, that would seem to be contrary to a treaty-centric option for a party to adhere to. So it's,
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess looking at it from this far out, 18 months, although as you say, many deals are yet to be made. And sometimes even if you have to sign a deal that's not the best, it might be better to be on inside the big tent looking out than outside the tent looking in. I guess we'll have to wait and see. That's really interesting. I jotted all those things down as well. And I know you said Tino Rangatira as the first one, but I just wrote autonomy. All right, autonomy, equity, partnership, active protection, and options. Those are the things I wrote down. So following those five things, that's a pretty good basis to think of what is something that is focused on or centered around the treaty when it comes to a partnership between two organizations, two parties, two people, whatever it is.
Correct.
Cool. That's awesome. Now, look, I mean, we've had you for longer than I said we have already, but I very much appreciate that, and I would love to get on to the second part of our conversation, which was today the petition to change New Zealand's Aotearoa has been presented to Parliament. I'm 1% confused on this because I think originally the Maori Party, the petition was to change the name, but I think what I've seen in the press today is to add the name. So we've been watching Jacinda Ardern over in the US. Every time she speaks publicly, she says Aotearoa New Zealand. Every single time. She hasn't had a law change to do that. She's, I guess, modelling it and saying this is what it's going to be. So just for clarity first, are we talking about the petition is going to be for a name change, i.e. New Zealand no longer exists as a name officially, Aotearoa becomes the number one name, or are we talking about it being added to, and what is your perspective on that?
I welcome the addition. I can imagine my father, who, along with 5 of his brothers and 2 brothers-in-law, went to the Second World War and fought under the flag of New Zealand. I can imagine him, if I said we're going to change the flag, we're going to change New Zealand, he would not be happy. Because comrades of his fell fighting for that flag and fighting for New Zealand.
For sure.
Right? So I welcome the addition, and I really do welcome the conversations that are happening. And this morning on breakfast, some of the thoughts were a little way out, and some of them were based on an ignorance of the facts of the history. But nevertheless, the conversation is really, really important to have. And that, like many, I have tended now to say Aotearoa New Zealand. And it's becoming normal. We actually don't need a law change to say
something.
One
of the questions. Yeah.
We just do it normally.
Yeah.
And I should add in here, Pat, that the word Māori actually means normal.
Right. Oh, I didn't know that.
It's wai Māori is normal water untainted by anything added to it. Māori, I sometimes apologize to others when I say, if you're not Māori, you can't be normal. Then I quickly add, well, actually, you might be super normal.
Hey, well, I guess that does raise the question, is this more of and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but is this more sort of a symbolic thing that the Maori Party are doing? Because I have to be honest, I live in Dunedin, and I often say Otepoti. It's just what I say. We greet everyone with kia ora. On all our emails, it's ngā mihi. You know, it seems to be a part of what we're doing anyway. And I know that there'll be some pushback, and I actually haven't heard this yet, but I know it will come about quote unquote forced speech. You can't force me to say that, but it does feel, whether it's coming through attrition or whether it's coming through a change in culture, that I always talk about, I kind of joke because I'm of Irish ancestry. I'm almost pale blue. I'm so Caucasian, you know. But it seems that all of us are just bringing those words on, especially, you know, through the last, say, 40 years. And so, yeah, without any disrespect to the Maori Party, is this more symbolic than anything because it's sort of happening anyway? And you could never force someone to say Aotearoa New Zealand anyway, should they? I mean, there are some people out there who still call it Mount Egmont, for goodness sake. You know, you can't force it, and it's happening naturally. So it feels a bit symbolic more than anything.
Well, symbols are actually extremely important.
Yeah.
Hey?
Yeah.
So the importance of the symbol. I tend to, I mean, I have Irish ancestry as well, and I'm proud of that ancestry. And in that pride of that ancestry, there are all sorts of symbols like the shamrock, etc., etc., etc.
Yep.
St. Patrick's Day, etc., which we celebrate, but we don't need a law to do that.
Yeah.
Hey. So I think that you're correct in saying that we don't need a law, and it's happening anyway. It's becoming a normal part of our culture.
Yeah.
So I celebrate that, but I also celebrate the Maori Party bringing this to the front. No, it seems to be happening, like you say, by attrition, and you will never ever force people who don't want to say Aotearoa to say Aotearoa.
That's very true.
That's just part of our culture.
Yep.
However, the symbolism of Aotearoa New Zealand and the importance of our bicultural society as a base of multiculture, right? So that recognizing this difference and acknowledging it, respecting it, is becoming a norm. And we're moving, sometimes we move too fast for some people, and that causes an angst.
Yeah.
But that again is a part of what we normally do as people. I mean, I think I sometimes use the example that I know in both my European ancestry as well as my Maori ancestry, some of my ancestors were cannibals. And in their time, that was totally acceptable to them in their culture. Now, goodness me, cannibalism, ooh, don't go there.
Yeah.
Right? But that's what happens naturally.
Yeah.
And we need to understand that, and we need to move with it, moving with the times.
Very true. From the Faculty of Maori and Indigenous Studies, University of Waikato, Associate Professor Tom Roa. Hey Tom, thanks for joining us so much today. It's been an education, and I love just being able to sit at the feet of people who are wiser and know more and learn a little bit. And I feel like I've had that tonight. So I really do appreciate having you on, and we would love to have you on again in the future should the need arise.
Kia ora, Pat.
All right, that's us. We're done for the night. If you joined us in the middle of that conversation, that will be up on YouTube in the next 15 or 20 minutes, that last conversation. Of course, the whole show is up there as well, basically, as soon as we finish. Well, it's up there now. We're broadcasting there, but the actual conversation will be up there. And if you are feeling tired and you can't do it now, then, of course, it'll be up there tomorrow as well. If you want to find us on YouTube, if you're not watching us here, if you're watching us on Twitter or Facebook or something, then the best thing to do is, there it is, there's the YouTube studio page. Or if you Google my name, or if you Google BHN, you'll find us that way as well. Not all the clips that we make, because we tune out clips most days, not all the clips that we make it to Facebook, right, just in case you're watching us there. But they do all make it to Twitter, and they do all make it to the YouTube channel. Basically, on Twitter, we share the YouTube clips. So if you are interested each day in getting, and we kind of make between 1 and 3 clips from the show every single day, and you can follow me there on Twitter. It's just at Pat Britton. It's an easy way to do it. And that conversation will be getting tweeted out in the next 20 minutes because it was a pre-record, so I've already got it ready to go. But mostly the conversations from the show in the evening typically go up onto YouTube somewhere between sort of 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon the next day, depending on how much work I've got to do, because we are pretty much a 1/2 man show. Me and George doing all of this at the moment on off our own backs. Nala, are we going to go to bed now? What do you reckon? Yeah? Do you want to come say hi? Come over here. Come over here. Come on. Come say hi. Come up here. Up. Oh, there's my big one. Hey, there she is. Here's my big one. Just move the microphone. Oh, someone's washed you. I can smell shampoo on you. Oh my goodness. She's gotten into something tonight because she's had a wash back onto her studio bed. All right, team. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tomorrow night, I have a plan to do a bit of a special show. A couple of weeks ago, we did the Anna Brooks COVID special. It's not booked in yet, so I'm not going to reveal what it is. It's not another COVID special, but it's another idea for another show, which will be more like a long-form hour where you guys can join in. Again, follow me on Twitter, scrolling along the bottom at the moment, and we'll give you a heads up early if we are going to go down that path. Don't want to say what it's going to be. It involves a guest who hasn't confirmed yet, so if they are available, we'll do it. If they aren't, we'll do a normal show, and I'm sure we'll all have a great time doing it. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe. Remember, wear your mask if you're out and about. Hasn't gone yet. Wash your hands. Be safe. We'll see you tomorrow night from